This is Calved by Sam J. Miller. And the narrator, me, I'm a guy. My son's eyes were broken, emptied out, frozen over. None of the joy or gladness were there, none of the tears. Normally I'd return from a job and his face would split down the middle with happiness, seeing me for the first time in 3 months. Now it stayed flat as ice. His eyes leaped away the instant they met mine. His shoulders were broader and his arms more sturdy. Lone hairs now stood on his upper lip, but his eyes were all I saw. "Theed," I said, grabbing him. He let himself be hugged. His arms hung limply at his sides. My lungs could not fill. My chest tightened from the force of all the never-let-me-go bear hugs he had given me over the course of the past 15 years and would never give again. "You know how he gets when you're away," his mother had said on the phone the night before, preparing me. "He's a teenager now. Hating your parents is a normal part of it." I hadn't listened then. My hands and thighs still ached from months of straddling an ice saw. My hearing was worse with every trip. A slip had cost me 5 days' work, 5 days' pay, 5 days' worth of infirmary bills. I'd returned to a sweat-smelling bunk in an illegal room I shared with 7 other ice boat workers. And none of it mattered, because in the morning I would see my son. "Hey," he murmured emotionlessly. "Dad." I stepped back, turned away until the red ebbed out of my face. Spring had come and the city had lowered its photo shade. It felt good, even in the cold wind. "You guys have fun," Legila said, pressing money discreetly into my palm. I watched her go with a rising sense of panic. "Bring back my son," I wanted to shout. "The one who loves me. Where is he? What have you done with him? Who is this surly creature?" Before us, through the ubiquitous steel grid that held up Quinnox's 2 million lives, black Greenland water sloshed against the locks of our floating city. "Breathe, Dom," I told myself, and eventually I could. "You knew this was coming. You knew one day he would cease to be a kid." "How's school?" I asked. Theed shrugged. "Fine." "Math still your favorite subject?" Math was never my favorite subject. I was pretty sure it had been, but I didn't want to argue. "What's your favorite subject?" Another shrug. We had met at the Sea Lion Rookery. I could see at once that Theed no longer cared about sea lions. He stalked through the crowd with me, his face a frozen mask of anger. I couldn't blame him for how easy he had it. So what if he didn't live in the Brooklyn foster care barracks or work all day at the solar cell plant school? He still had to live in a city that hated him for his dark skin and ice-grunt father. "Your mom says you got into the Institute," I said, unsure even of what that was. A management school, I imagined. Big deal for Theed, but he only nodded. At the fry stand, Theed grimaced at my clunky Swedish. The counter girl shifted to flawless English, but I would not be cheated of the little bit of the language that I knew. "French fries and coffee for me and my son," I said, or thought I did, because she looked confused. And then Theed muttered something, and she nodded and went away. And then I knew why it hurt so much, the look on his face. It wasn't that he wasn't a kid anymore. I could handle him growing up. What hurt was how he looked at me, like the rest of them look at me, these Swedes and Grid City natives for whom I would forever be a stupid New York refugee, even if I did get out 5 years before the fall. Gulls fought over food thrown to the lions. "How's your mom?" "She's good. Full manager now. We're moving to Arm 3 next year." His mother and I hadn't been meant to be. She was born here. Her parents, black Canadians, employed by one of the big Swedish construction firms that built Connick back when the Greenland melt began to open up the interior for resource extraction and Grid City started sprouting all along the coast. They kept her in public school, saying it would be good for a future manager to be able to relate to the immigrants and workers she'd one day command. And they were right. She even fell for one of them. Fresh off the boat, North American, taking tech classes, but wised up pretty soon after she saw how hard it was to raise a kid on an ice worker's pay. I'd never been mad at her. Legila was right to leave me, right to focus on her job, right to build a life for Theed I couldn't. Why don't you learn Swedish? He asked a French fry, unable to look at me. I'm trying, I said. I need to take a class, but they cost money, and anyway, I don't have time, I know. Hans' father says people make time for the things that are important for them. Here his eyes did meet mine, and held, sparkling with anger and abandonment. Han, one of your friends? Theed nodded, eyes escaping. Hans' father would be Chinese, not one of the laborers who helped build this city. All of them went home to hardship job rewards. He'd be an engineer or manager for one of the extraction firms. He would live in a nice house and work in an office. He would be able to make choices about how he spent his time. I have something for you, I said in desperation. I hadn't brought it for him. I carried it around with me, always, because it was comforting to have it with me, because I couldn't trust that the men I bunked with wouldn't steal it. Heart slipping, I handed over the New York fucking City t-shirt. It was my only prized possession. Thin as paper, safe as baby bunnies. My mom had made me scratch the letter U off it before I could wear the thing to school. And little Theed had loved it. We made a big ceremony of putting it on only once a year, on his birthday, knowing how much he had grown by how much it had shrunk on him. Sometimes if I stuck my nose in it and breathed deeply enough, I could still find a trace of the laundromat in the basement of my mother's building. On the brake screeched stink of the subway. What little was left of New York City was inside that shirt. Parting with it meant something huge and irrevocable. My son was slipping through my fingers, and he mattered more than the lost city, where whatever else I was, starving, broke, an urchin, a criminal, I belonged. Dad, Theed whispered, taking it, and here at last his eyes came back, the eyes of a boy who loved his father, who didn't care that his father was a thick-skulled, obstinate immigrant grunt, who believed his father could do anything. Dad, you love this shirt. But I love you more, I did not say, than anything. Instead, it'll fit you just fine now and then. Enough sea lions. Beam fights? Theed shrugged. I wondered if they had fallen out of fashion while I was away. So much did, every time I left. The ice ships were the only work I could get, capturing calved glacier chunks and breaking them down into drinking water to be sold to the whole new swaths of desert that ringed the globe. And the work was hard and dangerous, kept me forever in limbo. Only 2 fighters in the first fight, both lithe and swift and thin. Their styles an amalgam of Chinese martial arts. Not like the big bruising New York boxers who'd been the rage when I arrived illegally at 15 years old, having paid 2 drunks to vouch for my age. Back before the fail-proof trillion-dollar NYC flood-surge locks had failed, 80% of the city sunk, the grid city banned all new East Coast arrivals. Now the North Americans in Arm 8 were just one of many overcrowded, underskilled labor forces for the city's corporations to exploit. They leaped from beam to beam, fighting mostly in kicks, grappling briefly when both met on the same beam. I watched Theed. Thin, fragile Theed, with the wide eyes and nostrils that seemed to take it in all the world's ugliness, all its stink. He wasn't having a good time. When he was 12, he'd begged me to bring him. I had pretended to like it back then for his sake. Now he pretended for me. We were both acting out what we thought the other wanted, and that thought should have troubled me. But that's how it had been with my dad. That's what I thought being a man meant. Put my hand on his shoulder and did not shake it off, and he did not shake it off. We watched men harm each other high above us. Theed's eyes burned with wonder, staring up at the fretted sweep of the windscreen as we rose to meet it. We were deep in a day-long twilight. Soon the sun would set for weeks. This is not happening, he said, and stepped closer to me. His voice shook with joy. The elevator ride to the top of the city was obscenely expensive. We'd never been able to take it before. His mother had brought our tickets. Even for her, it hurt. Wondered why she hadn't taken him herself. He's getting bullied a lot in school, she told me on the phone. Behind her was the solid, comfortable silence of a respectable home. My background noise was 4 men building towards a fight over a card game. Also, I think he might be in love. But of course I couldn't ask him about either of those things. The first was my fault. The second was something no boy wanted to discuss with his father. I pushed a piece of trough meat loose from between my teeth, savored how close it came to the real thing. Only with Theed, with his mother's money, did I get to buy the classy stuff. Normally it was barrel bottom for me, greasy chunks that dissolved in my mouth to chews in, homebrew meat moonshine made in metal scrap furnace-heated metal troughs. Some grid cities were rumored to still have cows. That was the kind of lie people tell themselves to make life a little less ugly. Cows were extinct. Real beef was a joy no one would ever experience again. The windscreen was an engineering marvel, absolutely gorgeous. It shifted in response to headwinds. In severe storms, the city would raise its auxiliary windscreens to protect its entire circumference. The tiny panes of plastic glass were common enough. Thriving underground markets sold the fallen ones as good luck charms. But to see them knitted together was to tremble in the face of staggering genius. Complex patterns of crenellated reliefs, efficiently diverting wind shear no matter what angle it struck from. Bots swept past us on the metal grid lines, replacing panes that had fallen or cracked. Once, hand gripping mine tightly, somewhere down in the city beneath me, 6-year-old Theed had asked me how the windscreen worked. He asked me a lot of things then, about the locks that held the city up, how they could rise in response to tides and ocean level increases, about the big boats with strange words and symbols on the sides, and where they went, and what they brought back. "What's in that boat?" he'd ask about each one, and I would make up ridiculous stories. "That's a giraffe boat. That one brings back machine guns that shoot strawberries. That one is for naughty children." In truth, I only ever recognized ice boats by the multitude of pincers atop cranes all along the side. My son stood up straighter, 60 stories above his city. Some rough weight had fallen from his shoulders. He'd be strong, I saw. He'd be handsome, if he made it. If this horrible city didn't break him inside in some irreparable way. If marauding white boys didn't bash him for his dark skin. If the firms didn't pass him over for the lack of family connections on his stuttering immigrant father's side. I wondered who was bullying him and why. I imagined taking them two at a time and slamming their heads together so hard they popped like bubbles full of blood. Of course, I couldn't do that. I also imagined hugging him, grabbing him for no reason, maybe never letting go, but I couldn't do that either. He would wonder why. "I called last night and you weren't in," I said. "Doing anything fun?" "We went to the City Oak Arcade," he said. I nodded like I knew what that meant. Later on, I'd have to ask the men in my room. I couldn't keep up with this city, with its endlessly shifting fashions and slang, the new immigrant clusters that cropped up each time I blinked. 20 years after arriving, I was still a stranger. I wasn't just fresh off the boat. I was constantly getting back on the boat and then getting off again. That morning, I'd gone to the job center for the 5th day in a row and had been relieved to find no boat postings, only 12-month gigs. I wasn't that hungry yet. Booking a year-long job meant admitting you were old, desperate, unmoored, willing to accept payment only marginally more than nothing, for the privilege of a hammock and 3 bowls of trough slop a day. But captains pick their own crews for the shorter runs, and I worried that the lack of postings meant that with fewer boats going out, the competition had become too fierce for me. Every day a couple hundred new workers arrived from sunken cities in India or Middle Europe, or from any of 100 water war-torn nations, men and women stronger than me, more determined. With effort, I brought my mind back to the here and now. 20 other people stood in the pod with us. Happy, wealthy people. I wondered if they knew I wasn't one of them. I wondered if Theed was. They smiled down at their city. They thought it was so stable. I'd watch ice sheets calf off the glacier that were 5 times the size of Quannock. One of them came drifting in our direction. The windscreen wouldn't help us. The question was when, not if. I knew a truth they did not. How easy it is to lose something. Everything. Forever. A moist Nepalese foreman on one of my first ice ship runs said white North Americans were the worst for adapting to the post-Arctic world, because we'd lived for centuries in a bubble of believing the world was way better than it actually was, shielded by willful blindness and complex interlocking institutions of privilege. We mistook our uniqueness for universality. I'd hated him for it. It took me 15 years to see that he was right. "What do you think of those two?" I asked, pointing with my chin to a pair of girls his age. For a while he didn't answer. Then he said, "I know you can't help that you grew up in a backward macho culture. Can't you just keep that on the inside?" My own father would have cuffed me if I talked to him like that. But I was too afraid of rupturing the tiny bit of affectionate credit I'd fought so hard to earn back. His stance softened then. He took a tiny step closer, the only apology I could hope for. The pod began its descent. Halfway down, he unzipped his jacket, smiling in the warmth of the heated pod, while below-zero winds buffeted us. His T-shirt said "The Last Calf," and showed the gangly, sad-eyed hero of that depressing, miserable movie all the kids adored. "Where is it?" I asked. He'd proudly sported the New York fucking city shirt on each of the 5 times I'd seen him since giving it to him. His face darkened so fast I was frightened. His eyes welled up. He said, "Dad, But his voice had the tremor that meant he could barely keep from crying. Shame was what I saw. I couldn't breathe again, just like when I came home 2 weeks ago and he wasn't happy to see me. Except seeing my son so unhappy hurt worse than fearing he hated me. "Did somebody take it from you?" I asked, leaning in so no one else could hear me. "Someone at school? A bully?" He looked up, startled. He shook his head. Then he nodded. "Tell me, who did this?" He shook his head again. "Just some guys, Dad," he said. "Please, I don't want to talk about it." "Guys, how many?" He said nothing. I understood about snitching. I knew he'd never tell me who. "It doesn't matter," I said. "Okay, it's just a shirt. I don't care about it. I care about you. I care that you're okay. Are you okay?" Theed nodded and smiled, and I knew he was telling the truth, even if I wasn't, even if inside I was grieving the shirt and the little boy who I once wrapped up inside it. When I wasn't with Theed, I walked. For 2 weeks, I'd gone out walking every day, up and down Arm 8 and sometimes into other arms. Through shanty towns, large and small, huddled miserable agglomerations of recent arrivals and folks who, even after a couple of generations of Quantick, had not been able to scrape their way up from the fish-stinking, ice-slippery bottom. I looked for sex sometimes. It had been so long. Relationships were tough in my line of work. I'd never been interested in paying for it. Throughout my 20s, I could usually find a woman for something brief and fun and free of commitment, but that stage of my life seemed to have ended. I wondered why I hadn't tried harder to make it work with Legilla. I think a small but vocal and terrible part of me had been glad to see her leave. Fatherhood was hard work. So was being married. Paying rent on a tiny, shitty apartment way out on Arm 7, where we smelled like scorched cooking oil and diaper lotion all the time. Selfishly, I'd been glad to be alone. Only now, getting to know this stranger who was once my son, did I see what sweet and fitting punishments the universe had up its sleeve for selfishness. My time with Theed was wonderful and horrible. We could talk at length about movies and music. He actually seemed halfway interested in my stories about old New York. But whenever I tried to talk about life or school or girls or his future, he reverted to grunts and monosyllables. Something huge and heavy stood between me and him, a moon eclipsing the sun of me. I knew him, top to bottom and body and soul. He still had no idea who I really was, how I felt about him. I had no way to show him, no way to open his eyes, make him see how much I loved him, how he was really a good guy who'd gotten a bad deal in life. City Oak, it turned out, was like karaoke, except instead of singing a song, you visited a city. XHD footage projections onto all 4 walls, temperature control, short storylines that responded to your verbal decisions, even actual smells uncorked by machines from secret stashes of Beijing taxi seat leather or Ho Chi Minh City incense or Portland coffee shop sawdust. I went there often, hoping maybe to see him, to watch him with his friends, see what he was when I wasn't around. But City Oak was expensive. I could never afford to actually go in. Once, standing around outside the New York booth when a crew walked out, I caught a whiff of the acrid, ugly, beautiful stink of the Port Authority bus terminal. And then eventually I walked without any reason at all, because pretty soon I wouldn't be able to, because I had done it. I had booked a 12-month job. I was out of money and couldn't afford to rent my bed for another month. Thede's mom could have given it to me. What if she told him about it? He'd think of me as more of a useless moocher deadbeat dad than he already did. I couldn't take that chance. 3 days before my ship was set to load up and launch, I went back to the City Oak arcades. Men lurked in doorways and between shacks, soakers mostly, looking for marks, men to mug and drunks to tip into the sea. Late at night, too late for Thede to come carousing through. I called him earlier, but Legila said he was stuck inside for the night studying for a test in a class where he wasn't doing well. I'd hoped maybe he'd sneak out, meet some friends, head for the arcade. And that's when I saw it. The shirt. New York fucking City. Absolutely unique and unmistakable. Worn by a stranger. A muscular young man sitting on the stoop of a skiff moor. I didn't get a good glimpse of his face. I hurried past with my head turned away from him. I waited, 2 buildings down. My heart was alive and racing in my chest. I drew in deep gulps of cold air and tried to keep from shouting from joy. Here was my chance. Here was how I could show Thede what I really was. I stuck my head out, risked a glance. He sat there, waiting for who knows what. In profile, I could see that the man was Asian, almost certainly Chinese, in Quannock. Most other Asian nations had their own grid cities. Although perhaps he was descended from Asian nationals of some other country. I could see his smile, hungry and cold. At first I planned to confront him, ask how he came to be wearing my shirt, demand justice, beat him up and take it back. But that would be stupid. Unless I planned to kill him, and I didn't. It was too easy to imagine him gunning for Thede if he knew he'd been attacked for the shirt. I'd have to jump him, rob and strip and soak him. I rooted through a trash bin, but found nothing. 3 trash bins later, I found a short metal pipe with Hindi graffiti scribbled along its length. The man was still there when I went back. He was waiting for something. I could wait longer. I pulled my hood up, yanked the drawstring to tighten it around my face. 45 minutes passed that way. He hugged his knees to his chest, made himself small, trying to conserve body heat. His teeth chattered. Why was he wearing so little? But I was happy he was so stupid. Had he had a sweater or jacket on, I'd never have seen the shirt. I'd never have had this chance. Finally he stood, looked around sadly, brushed off the seat of his pants, turned to go, stepped into the swing of my metal pipe, but struck him in the chest and knocked him back a step. The shame came later. Then there was just joy. The satisfaction of how the pipe struck flesh, broke bone. I've spent 20 years getting shitted on by this city, by this system, by the cold wind and the everywhere ice, by the other workers who were smarter or stronger or spoke the language. For the first time since Thede was a baby, I felt like I was in control of something. Only when my victim finally passed out and rolled over onto his back, and the blue methane street lamp showed me how young he was under the blood, could I stop myself. I took the shirt. I took his pants. I rolled him into the water. I called the med team for him from a coin phone a block away. He was still breathing. He was young. He was healthy. He'd be fine. The pants I would burn in a scrap furnace. The shirt I would give back to my son. I took the money from his wallet and dropped it into the sea, then threw the money in later. I wasn't a thief. I was a good father. I said these sentences over and over all the way home. Couldn't see me the next day. Legila didn't know where he was, so I got to spend the whole day imagining imminent arrest, the arrival of Swedish or Chinese police, footage of me on the telescrolls, my cleverness foiled by tech I didn't know existed because I couldn't read the newspapers. I packed my one bag glumly, put the rest of my things back in the storage cube, and walked it to the facility. Every 5 seconds I looked over my shoulder, found only the same grit and filthy slush. Every time I looked at my watch, I winced at how little time I had left. My fear of punishment was balanced out by how happy I was. I wrapped the shirt in 3 layers of wrapping paper, put it in a watertight shipping bag, and tried to imagine his face. That shirt would change everything. His father would cease to be a savage jerk from an uncivilized land. The city would no longer be a cold and barren place where boys could beat him up and steal what mattered most to him with impunity. All the ways I had failed him would matter a little less. 12 months. I tried to get out of the gig. Now that I had the shirt, a new era of good relations with my son was upon me. But canceling would have cost me my accreditation with the work center, which would make finding another job almost impossible. A year away from Theed. I would tell him when I saw him. He'd be upset. The shirt would make it easier. Finally I called and he answered. "I want to see you," I said. We made our way through the pleasantries. "Sunday?" Did his voice brighten, or was that just blind, stupid hope? Some trick of the noisy Sin coffee shop where I sat. "No, Theed," I said, measuring my words carefully. "I can't. Can you do today?" A suspicious pause. "Why can't you do Sunday?" "Something's come up," I said. "Please, today." "Fine." The sea lion rookery, the smell of guano and the screech of gulls, the crying of children dragged away as the place shut down. The long night was almost upon us. 2 male sea lions barked at each other, bouncing their chests together. Theed came a half-hour late. I had arrived a half-hour early. Watching him come, my head swam. How tall he stood, how gracefully he walked. I'd done something good in the world, at least. I made him. I had that, no matter how he felt about me. Something had shifted now in his face. Something was harder, older, stronger. "Hey," I said, bear-hugging him. Eventually he submitted. He hugged me back hesitantly, like a man might, and then hard, like a little boy. "What's happening?" I asked. "What were you up to last night?" Theed shrugged. "Stuff. With friends." I asked him questions. Again the sullen, bitter silence. Again the terse and angry answers. Again the eyes darting around, constantly watching for whatever the next attack would be. Again the hating me for coming here, for making him. "I'm going away," I said. "A job." "I figured," he said. "I wish I didn't have to." "I'll see you soon." I nodded. I couldn't tell him it was a 12-month gig. Not now. "Here," I said, finally pulling the package out from inside my jacket. "I got you something." "Thanks." He grabbed it in both hands and began to tear it open. "Wait," I said, thinking fast. "Okay, open it after I leave." "Open it when the news that I'm leaving is set in. When you're mad at me for abandoning you. When you think I care only about my job." "Sure," I said. "Oh, no. We'll have a little time," he said, "when you get back, before I go away. I leave in 8 months. The program is 4 years long." "Sure," I said, shivering inside. "Mom says she'll pay for me to come home every year for the holiday, but she knows we can't afford that." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Come home? I thought you were going to the Institute." "I am," he said. "Do you know what that means? The Institute's design program is in Shanghai." "Oh," I said, "design. What kind of design?" My son's eyes rolled. "You're missing the point, Dad." I was. I always was. A shout from a pub across the arm. A man's shout, full of pain and anger. Theed flinched. His hands made fists. "What?" I asked, thinking here at last was something. "Nothing." "You can tell me. What's going on?" Theed frowned, then punched the metal railing so hard he yelped. He held up his hand to show me the blood. "Hey, Theed." "Han," he said. My friend. He got jumped 2 nights ago. Soaked." "This city is horrible," I whispered. He made a baffled face. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this city. Everyone's so full of anger and cruelty." "It's not the city, Dad. What does that even mean? Some sick person did this. Han was waiting for me, and Mom wouldn't let me out, and he got jumped. They took off all his clothes before they rolled him into the water. That's some extra cruel shit right there. He could have died. He almost did. I nodded silently, a siren of panic rising inside. You really care about this guy, don't you? He looked at me. My son's eyes were whole, intact, defiant, adults. He'd nodded. He's been getting bullied, his mother had told me. He's in love. I turned away from him before I could see the knowledge blossom in my eyes. The shirt hadn't been stolen. He'd given it away to the boy he loved. I saw them holding hands. I saw them tug at each other's clothing in the same fumbling adolescent puppy love moments I had shared with his mother, moments that were my only happy memories of being his age. And I saw his fear, how his backwards father might react, a refugee from a fallen, hate-filled people, if he knew what kind of man he was. I gagged on the unfairness of his assumptions about me, but how could he have known differently? What had I ever done to show him the truth of how I felt about him? And hadn't I proved him right? Hadn't I acted exactly like the monster he believed me to be? I'd never succeeded in proving to him what I was or how I felt. I'd battered and broken his beloved. There was nothing I could say. A smarter man would have asked for the present back, taken it away and locked it up. Burned it, maybe. But I couldn't. I'd spent his whole life trying to give him something worthy of how I felt about him, and here was the perfect gift at last. I love you, Theed, I said and hugged him. Dad, he said eventually, but I didn't let go, because when I did, he would leave. He would walk home through the cramped and frigid alleys of his home city to the gift of knowing what his father truly was.